I'm from the state of New Mexico, and I'm also native from a tribe located within the state. I'm not going to mention the tribe or what part of the state I'm from, obviously for privacy reasons. I'll start off by saying that growing up on the res as a member of the tribe, you're exposed to a lot of things. We take our tradition very serious, and we try to preserve it the best way we can. However, there are things that happen that are not talked about on the res. It's no secret that there are people who are evil. We all heard of skinwalkers and wendigos, evil spirits that torment people or corrupt their mind with evil. As crazy as these things sound, believe me, such things do exist. I have ran into evil spirits in my res, and I heard plenty of stories from fellow tribal members or friends that have experienced similar things. For example, the things they experienced included unnaturally whistling in the back hills of the res at night, or moving shadows in the trees, or even in the arroyos that are black and misshapen, or some owls that perch up in the nearby trees watching your house all night long. But this story that I'm going to share with you didn't happen to me or anyone that I know. It actually happened in one of the reservations here in New Mexico. I was in high school at the time of this incident. I went to a school where it was nothing but natives, and you had to have native blood in you to attend this school. Going to the school, there was always rumors going around of sketchy things that kids would see. Most of it was just that, a rumor, made up of incidents to scare each other. But one day, what I thought was a rumor actually turned out to be true. Did you hear what he did to the body? After he did that, he sat there with his face painted. I heard a girl say to her group of friends, "What the hell?" I thought. I didn't know who these students were talking about or what they meant by, "He sat there with his face painted." I continued to class, and before lunchtime, I had a partial understanding of what happened because I was asking around a bit. A young man from the pueblo of Jimenez had killed another young man in a very brutal way. As the lunch hour proceeded, I found out more information on what happened. The man who killed the other man were both friends. The man that committed the killing disemboweled his victim in a gruesome and satanic way, and they say that he even lit candles around the body. There's no way this could have happened. There's no way this could be true, I thought. But when I got home, I found out all the gruesome details were true. There was no hiding it. It was all over the news. When something like a murder like this happens in New Mexico, especially one like this, you can guarantee it will be on the news. I sat there in disbelief as the newscaster spoke on the incident. A man from Jimenez is being held on charges for killing another man, 21-year-old Matthew Panama, on the Jimenez Pueblo reservation late Saturday night. The rumors from school had turned out to be true. The man did kill his friend in a very gruesome way. He did disembowel the body and proceeded to paint his face black and white, like he was trying to bring forth something evil in a satanic sacrificial ceremony of some sort. All this was hard to take in. This incident not only shook the people of Jimenez, but all the neighboring Pueblo communities as well. Weeks after the incident, information was still coming to light. The Pueblo of Jimenez banned trick-or-treating that year. They also had a bunch of different medicine men from around the Pueblo perform a huge ceremony curing to get rid of any evil that was there. The reason they had to take such measures is because of the traditional beliefs that they have. When an incident of this size happens, the whole Pueblo has to be cleansed. I don't blame them for taking such steps. They, as well as myself, believe that this man was possessed by something that was pure evil, and it corrupted his mind. Some would compare it to the evil spirit of a skinwalker, or maybe something along the lines of a curse from a skinwalker. The Pueblos have their own names for these evil spirits, and I truly do believe that one of them got inside this man. Either that, or he was involved in black magic. But whatever the case may be, I know something evil was involved. Now some of you might think I'm making this up or exaggerating on the details, I understand where you're coming from, because I enjoy listening to scary stories of the paranormal, and I find myself doubting people's stories sometimes. But I'm telling you, all of this is true. If you don't believe me, here's a link to the article on the murder and even the court document itself. And I'll leave you with this as well. Be careful of who you surround yourself with. Be careful what the people around you believe in. The last thing you want to do is be involved in witchcraft. I'm writing this to share a warning with you all. There are things you shouldn't dig into, read about, or even listen to. I've been listening to scary stories, just like most of you that will hear this one. I know you enjoy stories of the paranormal, skinwalkers, and stories about bad medicine, witchcraft, and black magic, or as we call it back home, Brujeria. I'm not referring to evil ladies wearing pointy hats, performing rituals at night, as witchcraft can be performed by anybody who practices these dark things. Among natives, there are many superstitions and warnings that have been passed down through generations, like not whistling at night, or not speaking of certain things at night. Well, let me tell you, bad medicine, brujeria, it's all true. You see, I've been cursed my whole life. Ever since the events I'm about to share with you, I have always been afraid to put these memories into words. But I know my life is coming to an end. I feel like I gotta share this story with you all. Maybe it's the weight of my age, or I'm simply trying to unburden myself. But I want you to know that if something does happen, I have lived my life fully, and I'm at peace with my maker. This is one of my final testaments about the disappearance of my best friend, Stephanie Rodriguez. Back in the 90s, after working so hard without taking any vacay, I finally decided to take a break from work. My girlfriend Stephanie were both passionate about hiking and camping, so we decided that it was time to explore a new place. Stephanie, who is Mexican, suggested that we explore some of the beautiful isolated mountain regions down in Mexico, where some of her family lived, or at least used to live. I'm also half Mexican. I speak Spanish and been to Mexico plenty of times. However, Stephanie was actually born in Mexico, and she grew up there, so she was a lot more familiar with the regions. We have been dating for a few years now, and before you ask, I was actually planning to propose to her at the mountaintop of where we were going. So the day arrived, we packed our bags and set out. However, despite all the warnings and concerns expressed by family and friends, they told us that the area was very unsafe at that time because there were many conflicts for various reasons. Stories of drug cartels fighting over land, cursed places and territories where people simply don't venture out. Many regions that were left alone because the natives had not welcomed anyone for many generations. It wasn't the right place for us as a couple to venture out to, but we didn't let fear stop us. Her family lived in the state of Guerrero. She had shown me pictures of this place of when she was a kid, and it was beautiful. Our plan was to reach the town and stay there for a night. From there, we would travel a long path that would lead to a forested area. That's where several isolated communities were located, and one of these was the birthplace of my girlfriend's father and several of her relatives from when she was a child. She used to visit that place with her family and had beautiful memories of there. She said that everyone there was connected to nature and the surroundings, very traditional and not up to date on the latest tech. It's not that they were behind, they prefer to stay in between themselves and their traditional roots. Which was fine, but as you all know, and now I know, sometimes separating yourself from the world and living remotely can be the best thing, or the worst thing. Personally, I wanted to enjoy the experience of a campsite in the middle of the forest, in another country, and see what differences this had from hiking and camping in the States. We arrived in town after a day. We had our map. It was the 90s, a time when cell phones were not fully around yet. As we ate at one of the small food places, we also asked one of the locals for directions to the village. After all, this was undeveloped land, with dirt roads cutting through dense forested areas. The guy gave us a curious look and asked, "Why do you want to go there?" Stephanie responded by saying, "I grew up in this village and wanted to visit some of my family." The expression of the guy shifted to one of concern. He pointed out the location of the village on the map and said, "Just be careful. Make sure you get there before the sun goes down. That place, it isn't what it used to be." His warning sent a shiver down my spine. But again, what isn't creepy or mysterious out here in these remote areas? We thanked them and started our journey, venturing onto a path that was leading towards the woods. Despite the bright sunshine, a strange sense of unease began to overwhelm me. It felt like somebody was watching us. It was the curious eyes of the locals that we would come across. They seemed to follow us and stare at us. I inquired from Stephanie why these people were just looking at us. "That's how people are here. They don't really like outsiders. Just ignore them," she said. Despite this, we kept walking down the path until about an hour of walking, we finally arrived at this community village. As soon as we got there, everything seemed off. It was a small community with about 10 houses. We saw some people standing outside their homes, but the way they looked at us was creepy, kind of scary. I couldn't help but think about how Stephanie had grown up in such an isolated area. When I saw her face and I heard that she said that something was very wrong and that this place wasn't like it was before, I got scared again. Maybe I seen too many scary movies. We kept walking and finally, we arrived at the house of Stephanie's relatives, a beat-up home with a roof that was falling apart and boarded-up windows. Seeing the place in ruins was disappointing. It wasn't what I had imagined for our visit. After knocking, an old woman came out to greet us. She turned out to be the widow of Stephanie's uncle, who apparently died of a fever. But the way she explained it, the way she was stuttering and shaking, made it seem like she was making up stuff. She then invited us in, and that's when I saw. All the walls were corroded and discolored. The smell of oil and food filled the air, and all the candles were creating a creepy environment. There was old worn furniture everywhere. I looked at Stephanie, whose face reflected surprise and disappointment. She asked why everything was empty, almost rotting away, and before we could say anything else, the woman led us to a small room at the back of the house. We sat on some torn sofas. We watched the woman as she told us about the sadness and hardship that she has lived through since her husband's passing. He apparently died some time ago. She said her husband and several men from the village, mostly men, were working out in the fields when one day, they all suddenly fell ill. They started to suffer from a strange disease that consumed them without any cause, and there wasn't any cure for those sudden fevers. This illness devastated them and left them almost to the bone. Others said that they looked like zombies, just rotting alive. They died in complete agony. Those who weren't struck by this disease, they simply disappear into the forest. People started talking around the village that someone was doing Brujeria. The woman was telling us that nothing prospered in this place anymore. It was suspected that something horrible and sinister was behind it all. The rumor was that some people who practiced witchcraft had arrived here. Everything seemed connected to the arrival of some very strange men, outsiders who had come to the area. She said these people sought refuge in the mountains to carry out their practices. Even though the woman didn't want to reveal specific details, she said that these men ended up worshipping something dark and evil. Eventually, the townspeople came into conflict with these people, as people were falling ill, disappearing, babies were being born dead, livestock dying, all types of noises at night, and some people even said seeing weird disfigured silhouettes. outside their windows at night. Eventually, this ended bad for the people in the village. As soon as the woman finished telling us all of this, I turned to Stephanie and said, "Let's get out of here right now." "But wait," my girlfriend said, turning to the woman. "Have you ever actually seen any witches?" The woman shook her head. "No, I never seen them myself. It's just what people say around here." Stephanie smiled and looked back at me. "See, let's just go to the mountaintop. It's not that far. We can take some pictures and come right back before nighttime." I hesitated, feeling a knot of unease in my stomach. This place gives me the creeps. It's still daylight. There's no witches around. It'll be quick. I sighed, still feeling uneasy, and the only reason I agreed to is because of the whole proposal idea. "Alright, but let's make it quick," I said. Just as we were about to leave, the woman grabbed my arm. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Remember this. If you hear whispers in the wind, or see stuff that you're not supposed to see, don't acknowledge it. Ignore everything strange that you might encounter, and return before dark. Once the sun sets, no one is going to be able to protect you." She then let go and started walking away from us. We ended up walking along a path that led into the mountain, moving further away from the village. As we walked, I turned to Stephanie. "Does any of your family still live here? What about your uncle?" She sighed, looking a bit sad. "The rest of my family ended up moving out of the village and into the town. From there, we dispersed to different areas outside of Guerrero. The only relative still living here was my uncle, but apparently my family failed to communicate that with me. Or I mean, who else might have known about my uncle?" she said. She did have a point. There was no internet or technology back then. Everything was snail mail. "So no one else in your family comes back here?" She shook her head. "Not really. It's been years since anyone from my family has returned. We kinda lost touch over time. I knew that her mom or dad didn't live here. It was her further out family and relatives that lived here. Let's make this quick and get back before dark, like the lady said." Stephanie nodded, and we continued. After about 30 minutes, we arrived. The landscape was very beautiful, with panoramic views of the valleys and forests stretching as far as the eye could see. Despite all the warnings and the experiences that we had, I couldn't deny the natural beauty of that place. After some pictures, I had planned to pull out the ring, but because of the creepy circumstances, finding out about her uncle's recent passing, and all the scary feelings I had, I chose not to do it. Stephanie and I sat down and she began talking to me for a few minutes. She was telling me how she used to come up here when she was a little kid. We soaked in the views together, but still, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had settled in my gut. At this point, I was ready to leave Mexico and go back to the States. "We should head back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Stephanie nodded. "Yeah, let's go. We'll come back another time." Yeah, fucking right, I thought. Never coming here again. We started our descent, and the sun was now starting to dip lower in the sky as well. As we were walking back, a strange feeling began to creep over me again. It seemed as though someone or something was watching us from the trees and bushes. Kind of like that feeling that you get when somebody is watching you. I mentioned this feeling to Stephanie, but she simply dismissed it as my imagination. We continued moving. I figure it must have been some of those crazy people from the village or from the town. After some walking and arguing back and forth, we realized we had been walking in circles on the same path without finding our way back to the village. Slowly, the sun began to set, filling me with fear and desperation. Despite being ready for camping in this area, the whole situation, along with all the stories and rumors we heard, made me imagine the worst. The feeling of being lost became so overwhelming, and fear took hold of us with each passing minute. I do regret it now, but we ended up camping. Stephanie was used to being in these situations and said that in the morning the path would look better with the sunlight. There was nothing to worry about. We just had to spend the night here and return in the morning. So we set everything up and we tried to light a fire to get some light and warmness. But even the crackling flames seemed scary. Time passed slowly as we both went into the tent, trying to find some sense of security and get some rest. Eventually, I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up to find Stephanie sitting up, breathing real heavy, which made me nervous. As soon as she saw that I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth before I could ask what was happening. We stayed silent, and then we heard footsteps right next to the tent. At that moment, fear overwhelmed me, and it got worse when the tent was suddenly open. Somebody dressed in black emerged. A man with his face all covered in mud. At least, that's what I thought it looked like. He grabbed Stephanie by the hair and started dragging her outside. I tried to stop them from taking her, but outside, I saw a large group of dark figures dressed in black robes. I was petrified with fear at this whole terrifying scene. Despite my desperate struggle to prevent them from taking Stephanie, I couldn't. I fought to hold on to her, but all of my efforts were in vain. In the blink of an eye, I was pushed aside, finding myself alone in the middle of nowhere, helpless against these people surrounding the tent. That's when the whispers and sinister laughing filled the air, increasing my panic with each passing second. Desperation overtook me as I realized I was alone, facing about 12 of these things around me. That's when I heard Stephanie's terrified screams, pleading for help, crying out in pain. I shouted desperately, trying to find out where she was. I wanted to run and find a way to escape. But then, one of those black figures blocked my path, and the next thing I felt was a strong blow to the head, and then everything went dark. The first rays of sunlight woke me up. My body was aching, and everything seemed calm. Suddenly, the memory came rushing back. I ran to get away from there, taking the first path that I saw. I hadn't gone too far when I entered a clearing, and what I discovered made me shiver and scream in horror. There was a large rock. It was covered in blood. Stephanie's clothes were scattered everywhere, torn and bloodstained. There seemed to be animal bones and satanic symbols drawn in blood on the surrounding rocks. That's when I remembered what the woman had told us, and I started running to get away from that place until I reached the village, begging for help, but no one helped me. I ran to the woman's house and she remained very calm outside, smoking tobacco. She looked at me and said, "Stephanie is no longer with us. Be thankful that they spared your life. Leave here and never come back." After saying this, I ran away desperately, distancing myself from everything around here. As I fled the village, my heart started pounding with fear and adrenaline. The town was miles away, and the path was really rocky. I stumbled through the dense forest. When I finally reached the outskirts of the town, exhausted and desperate, I tried to report Stephanie's disappearance to the police, at least to the local authorities, but they didn't seem like they cared. It was almost like they knew what was going on in the mountains and had chose to turn a blind eye. I ended up leaving the town as nobody was helping, and my priority was to inform Stephanie's family about what happened. I don't remember the journey back, but my mind was remembering what I witnessed and the overwhelming fear that had settled deep within me. As I approached Stephanie's parents' house, I asked myself, how was I going to explain this? I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Stephanie's mother answered. Her face had a hopeful smile that quickly turned to her being confused as she noticed that I was alone. "Where's Stephanie?" she asked. I took a deep breath. my voice trembling as I try to find the right words. I'm sorry. Something terrible happened. We went to the village and Stephanie was taken. There were these people. They dragged her away. I tried to stop them, but there were too many. Her face got pale, and she stumbled back, her hand covering her mouth. Her cries drew the rest of the family to the door. Her father. Everybody was there staring at me, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. You lost her. How could you lose her? Her mother said, her voice breaking with grief. I tried to explain, recounting the events as best as I could, but even I couldn't believe what I was explaining. The more I spoke, the more I could tell they were being filled with anger. Stephanie's father then stepped in front of me. You shouldn't have gone there, he said. His voice was low. There are things in those mountains, things that you will never understand. We never want to see your face again. You brought this curse to our family. As I turned to leave, Stephanie's father grabbed my arm, pulling me close. His eyes bore into mine. Leave this place and never come back, he whispered. You brought back something dark with you. Go and pray that it doesn't follow you back home. Tears streaming down my face. But now that I think about it, and now that I look back, Stephanie's family knew something. Why didn't they go look for her? Why didn't they call the police? What if they were involved? The mind can go to some dark places when you just linger into the same thoughts over and over. I left Mexico as quickly as possible, hoping to find peace and safety back in the States. But as soon as I made it back home, the nightmares began that first night. I would wake up in sweat, hearing Stephanie's screams and seeing those dark, shadowy figures closing in on me. Days turned into weeks, and the nightmares only grew worse. I became somebody who I didn't know, convinced that those forces from Mexico had followed me. My friends and family noticed the change in me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full extent of what happened. How could I? They would think that I lost my mind. Anyways, it's been over 30 years since that horrifying day, and not a single moment passes without the memories haunting me. Everything that I experienced just doesn't fade away with time. It seeped into every aspect of my life, changing me in ways that I never expected. Relationships, even simple daily routines. Everything was tainted by the darkness that had followed me out of those cursed mountains. I sought help from a therapist, trying every possible remedy to cleanse myself of that curse. Some offered some temporary relief, but nothing could truly erase what I had witnessed, or the guilt that I carried for losing Stephanie. It was a wound that never healed, a scar that only deepened with time. Despite the years that have passed, the feeling of somebody watching me has never left me. I have learned to cope, to live with this feeling, but the fear never truly goes away. I dedicated much of my time to researching Brujeria and other supernatural things, hoping to find answers, or at least some sort of understanding. But the more that I learned, the more I realized how little we truly know about the dark forces that exist around us. I want you to understand this. If you want to be like everyone else and not believe my story, that's fine. But if you could take one thing away from this, I want you to understand that there are things out there that are beyond our understanding, forces that shouldn't be messed with. My story isn't just a warning, it's a testament to the real dangers that exist. Brujeria are not just stories to be laughed at, they are real, and they have real consequences. For now, I beg you, listen to my words and be careful out there. There are doors that should never be opened. Stay away from Brujeria, witchcraft, and remember my story as a reminder of what awaits those who ignore the warnings. This story is only the beginning. If I'm still here and if the story finds its audience, maybe one day I'll share the rest. Until then, be safe and always say your prayers. I want to tell you about something that happened to me not long ago at my grandpa's ranch in West Texas. Even now, it seems very strange to me, and ever since that day, I've been afraid to stay there. I hope someone can help me and give me more information about this situation. My grandfather's ranch is a stretch of land at the foothills of a mountain area. The area is full of hills and valleys, and it's surrounded by a forest. There are neighbors, but each neighbor has so many acres of forested area behind their house. The weather is pretty cool most of the year, and it's very cold during the winter. I guess because of the elevation. The ranch does offer a great view of the valley, as long as the fog doesn't cover everything and block the view. For any nature and cold weather lover, it's the perfect place to spend a weekend. From a very young age, I remember spending holidays and weekends there with my family. Most of the birthdays were celebrated there. Let me put it this way, the ranch is a spot for family and friends. But this story that I want to tell you happened around July 4th weekend. At that time, the whole family went. My grandfather had organized a full fiesta with typical food and brought fireworks to celebrate Independence Day. When I say the whole family, I mean about 20 people. But my grandfather, my father, and a cousin witnessed everything that went down. It was around 8 p.m., and everyone else was inside the house waiting for dinner. My cousin and I had been drinking, and we didn't want to go inside. Let's just say that we preferred the stillness of the night, which gave us a view of the valley. The beer and the cold made me really need to use the bathroom at some point. I had two options: go to the bathroom in the house, or go to the outhouse, which was about a 5-minute walk from the house. I decided to go to the outhouse, just to avoid being convinced to go inside. I told my cousin that I was going to be back, and I started walking towards it. It was a little creepy. Walking through a field in the dark is pretty creepy, no matter where you're at. As I'm walking, I swear I noticed something strange between the trees. Even though the moon provided some light, it wasn't enough to see perfectly what was there. I swear something was moving among the trees. At first, I thought it might be a wild animal, maybe the dog that my grandpa had. I stopped walking and tried to focus on what was there. It seemed to be moving really slow between the trees, appearing to do so. I swear, it was something closer to a human than an animal, and it seemed to be moving unnaturally. Then, whatever was out there just seemed to stop. At this point, I'm creeped out, so fuck going all the way to the outhouse. I decided to use it right there in the open field, not taking my eyes away from the trees. As soon as I was done, I started running back to where my cousin was at. My cousin then jokingly said if I decided to just water the grass. I didn't say anything, and I just told him that it's better if we go inside. Besides, dinner was almost ready. He then asked me if I was okay. I simply nodded. My cousin didn't fully believe me, but he followed me inside the house. Hours passed, and the party didn't stop. My family tends to do things big, especially when we all get together. On my part, I couldn't stop thinking about what was out there. Something kept telling me that what I had seen wasn't normal, and to make things worse, it was close to the house. Suddenly, while my cousins and uncles were singing, we started to hear barking outside. It was one of the dogs that belonged to my grandpa. "What's happening?" I asked my grandfather. "I don't know. I'm not sure." Max started barking at nothing. He probably saw a raccoon or something. "Just leave him be. It'll pass," he replied. Despite my grandfather thinking it was normal, something inside of me kept saying that it could be what I saw out there. Even so, I didn't say anything about it to not ruin dinner. I also didn't want them to think that I was scared. Around 2 in the morning, sleep was starting to overtake me. Most of the women had already fallen asleep, and only a few of us were still up, playing dominoes at the dining table. Suddenly, a gunshot was heard outside the ranch. That noise made everyone get up from the table. My grandfather, my father, and another uncle went out to the lookout and saw that the house of some neighbors had all its lights on, and people with flashlights were searching for something. They most likely shot a coyote or some animal. It's pretty common for mountain lions and other animals to come down and kill some of the chickens, said my grandfather, as if he was used to it. However, it's not a right time to be shooting, one of my uncles said. They could cause an accident. Yeah, but those people are like that. They've been ranchers all their life. That's how they end up defending their land and their animals. It's better not to get involved with them, my grandfather responded. And with that, the party ended. We agreed to put things away and go to sleep. I was in the same room as my cousins. Several of them were already asleep, so my cousin and I entered quietly, trying not to make any noise. We avoided closing a window that was a little bit open, just to not wake anyone up. I lay down to sleep, and about an hour later, I woke up to a strange noise. It was like someone was scratching the walls and breathing heavy through their nose. At first, I thought it could be one of my cousins snoring, but no, this noise seemed to come from outside the window. I got nervous, and the noise was getting closer and closer, so I decided to pretend to be asleep and to wait to see what it was. I curled up underneath the cover but stayed looking at the window. Suddenly, I saw what appeared to be a hand with pointed fingers, and that's when a pale face peeked through the window, and I finally saw it. It looked completely disfigured. It was horrible, looking everywhere as if searching for something or someone. Then, it placed its hand on the open window and started pushing it with force. The creaking noise was loud enough to wake 2 of my cousins up. I'm not sure if we were simply lucky, but it made this creature leave and disappear into the woods. I then got up and closed the window, and that's when my cousins saw me completely terrified. They asked me what happened, and I told them everything that I saw. I was almost at the point of tears because honestly, I couldn't believe anything. Besides, I didn't know if it was going to hurt us. My cousins tried to calm me down and told me that by morning, everything would be fine. One of them takes sleeping pills, so he gave me one, and within a few minutes, I fell into a deep sleep. The next day when I finally woke up, I learned that my grandfather's dog was gone. It was strange because that dog would never leave. It practically slept at the house entrance. My grandfather, fearful that something happened to him, he asked all of us to go out and look for him. The women looked around the house, and we started combing the fence area. While looking around, we found that near the outhouse, something or someone had made a hole, and we figured that the dog might have gotten out through there. So we decided to take a truck, my father, my cousin, and I. We ventured into the forest, and at some point, we got out of the truck and continued on foot. My father was ahead of us when he suddenly signaled for us to stop. We walked up to him and saw that he was pale. In front of us was that hideous thing that I saw at night. A bald head like a stone and a disfigured face. It was standing, just looking at us, a few yards away from us. In its hands, it held a missing dog. The dog was mutilated, and we barely even recognized it. In its other arm, it was holding some of the organs that belonged to it. It continued staring at us. Then, it threw the dog into the ground right in front of us, and that's when my father started shooting at it, but it was too late. It disappeared into the trees and headed towards the river. My father did end up getting the dog, and we took it back to the house, but we couldn't bring ourselves to tell my grandfather what happened. We just told him that a mountain lion had attacked the dog, and that it was better for him to return to the city with us. We didn't want to tell him to stay there at night, because obviously, It was dangerous now. Seeing his beloved dog, my grandfather started crying. He then told us that a mountain lion couldn't have done this. Of course he knew we were lying. However, I guess after seeing this, he agreed to return to the city for just a little bit. The months went by, and my father received a call from my grandpa. In the phone call, he didn't say much. He just said it was safe to go back to the ranch, and that he was now starting to get ready for the New Year's party. He mentioned there was nothing to worry about anymore, as the neighbors had dealt with the so-called mountain lion. To this day, my grandfather hasn't said what the neighbors killed, but to be honest, ever since we returned to the ranch, we haven't seen it again. Nothing goes on at night, and the neighbors assure us there is nothing to fear. They go hunting here and there, and my grandpa goes with them as well, to make sure that nothing disturbs the peace of the area again. I'm not sure what that thing was. Has anybody ever encountered something like this? If so, let me know. I've always been a mountain person. When people say they go to the beach for a vacay, I respect it, but I prefer the mountains. Something about these old giants have always fascinated me, as if I just cannot avoid but to be drawn towards them and be in awe. I'm a 21-year-old student. I consider that I have seen a fair amount of mountain ranges in Europe, all the way from Switzerland to Spain, and many other places around the world. I have always hiked and camped outdoors a lot, with family and friends, but also by myself. Now, I went to the US for college, and I've always been tempted to do a part of the Appalachian Trail. From the pictures that I've seen on the internet, I always wanted to see them in person, and I'm not gonna lie, I must say that the great amount of scary stories of these mountains always attracted me a little bit as well. I am definitely not a person who likes scary movies or anything, but I enjoy reading fellow mountain experiences, and to be honest, I mostly just read stories about the Appalachian Trail to know how to get ready for when I go. That being said, I decided to go this year and do a small part of the Appalachian Trail. I went to do a small part between the borders of Tennessee and North Carolina, with Clingman's Dome being the icing on the cake. I was a little bit cautious to go by myself, since I'm not very familiar with both the geography as well as the wildlife in this part of the States. I wanted to go with a friend or my girlfriend, who is from North Carolina herself, but both my friend and my girlfriend declined because they had to work, which the plan was to go during spring break, so I just chose to go by myself since I am graduating this year and will return back to Europe. I started at this place called Bryson City, and walked along the river until I reached the Nolan Creek. From there on, I just followed the trail until I got to Clingman's Dome, and from there, I would follow the trail for about a week. I had everything for this trip. I carried bear spray and pepper spray. I read some creepy stories about people in the Appalachian Trail, and I also brought an axe and a hunting knife. I had some canned food and lots of water, and for the rest, just my sleeping bag and tent. So when I started walking away from Bryson City, and I saw this beautiful mountain range, I couldn't be happier. I had been wanting to do this since I had arrived here in the US, and I was finally doing it. I did come across some people on the Nolan Creek. They were friendly, but I had to make up my mind that I would be better off alone than with strangers. I got to Clingman's Dome the same day, and I went a little further before I would set up camp. It was beautiful. At night, I slept a bit off the trail with a small campfire where I would get dinner ready. The first night went super well, and I was also exhausted from the hike to Clingman's Dome. The next 2 days were just as beautiful, and I saw lots of breathtaking views. The people I encountered on the trail were super polite as well. Then, on the third night, I feel like everything just took a strange turn. I had set up my camp just as usual, around 160 feet from the trail. No one was camping close to me, or at least not that I was aware of. While getting dinner, I got this super weird gut feeling that I was not there alone. I felt like if someone was looking at me from behind a tree, or something like that. I tried to just convince myself that I was having an amazing time, that I was safe, and that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I went to sleep and put out the fire as always. Then, before it was daylight again, I woke up with that same gut feeling that even though I was in my tent, someone was watching me from a distance. I didn't hear a single bird, which was weird, because right before daylight is when they start chirping again. I only heard the wind. It made me feel uncomfortable, a bit scared, not gonna lie. I didn't fall asleep again, and first thing in the morning, after having breakfast in my tent, I broke up camp and decided to continue my hike. During my hike, I encountered a few people, and again they were very nice, but I stick to myself. While waiting on this part of the trail by myself alone, I felt like somebody was watching me again. I even had this feeling as if someone, or something, was following me. So every now and then, I would stop dead in my tracks to see if anything was following me. Now obviously my mind could be playing tricks, but I swear, I would hear some footsteps stop the second after I had actually stopped. According to me at that moment, someone was following me. I looked around the whole time and I never saw someone or something, which actually made it even more weird. After the long day of hiking, I made camp, this time closer to the trail than before, because for some reason I thought it would be more safe. I again had this feeling of somebody watching me while having dinner outside my tent. So I decided to finish it up in my tent, and I went to the bathroom in a bottle, because I didn't want to go outside now. That's how scared I was. I tried sleeping by closing my eyes, but my mind just focused on hearing the whole time. And that's when I heard it for the first time. A knock, as if a branch was hitting a tree, or a small rock was getting thrown at a tree. Silence then followed, for like what seemed forever, but it was most likely just like 10 minutes. Then again, except this time, it was more clear. I was scared now, and I had no idea where to go since it was dark already. I put my flashlight in the tent and made myself as big as I could, so that my shadow outside the tent would look bigger because of the light. I don't know why this was my reasoning at the time. I just thought about bears, and I held my hunting knife in my hand. The silence had followed the second knock, but now I shouted to pierce the silence in the dark. First, I shouted that whoever was joking around, I was armed, and I was not wanting to be pranked. I thought this would scare them off, but it didn't. It was almost like if this person found it even more funny, knowing that I was pissed off at them. I heard another knock, and right after that, a knock on what I assumed to be the opposite side of my tent. So now, I was guessing it was two people instead of one, and that they like to pull pranks on people who pass by. I tried to stay up as long as I could, but around 4 in the morning, my eyes just gave up. I woke up around 8 o'clock, again, with the light of the sun being my savior. I first tried to hear if whoever was pranking me was still knocking, but I didn't hear anything. I shouted again, stating that I was now gonna exit my tent with my knife in my hand, and that whoever was joking around should make themselves known. I walked out of my tent and I didn't see anyone. I looked for tracks around my camp, but I couldn't make something out of it. I decided to get the hell out of there. The next part of my week basically continued being the same. At night, I would hear some knocks from different directions. And sometimes, I kid you not, I heard what sounded like a little bit of humming, like as if a person was just humming a tune. Now, I never saw anyone, except from the occasional hikers on the trail, so I can't say I saw something weird. But one thing is for sure, that weird feeling of somebody or something watching me stayed with me for the rest of my hike on the trail. I did make it back home, and I talked to my girlfriend about this, and she said it was most likely my mind playing tricks on me, and I was willing to believe her because I never saw anything, but I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night feeling like I'm still in that tent in the middle of nowhere, and I feel like somebody is watching me and knocking on a tree. And every time I wake up like this, the thought of being out there again scares me. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington. Not like an official campground, just way out in the forest where I wouldn't have expected another human for miles. One night, I wake up and hear something. I open my tent, and there is a guy sitting by where my fire had been right outside my tent. Nothing strange about the guy, just a normal looking dude, sitting there a couple feet from my tent. No backpack or anything with him, just a guy. He saw me open the tent, and his eyes got big, like he had just seen a ghost, and he took off. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day, I was able to put it out of my mind. After writing it off as just some strange occurrence, and a guy that was maybe high or something, and had somehow managed to set up a camp not far from mine. Then, 2 days after that, and 10 to 15 miles away in a totally different direction that nobody could take the same path as on accident, I was sitting by the fire that night, and I started to hear noises that I got more and more convinced were a person. I called out to them, and out of the darkness someone was like, "Yo, do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said no, I don't even think that's a real place there. They kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, aimed that way, and sounded kinda scared and not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person. I pointed the flashlight somewhere else. After like 15 minutes of being freaked out, and this person just talking and asking completely random questions, from the darkness, it sounded like the voice had gotten closer. So I ended up shining my light that way again. And it was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. He must have followed me about 15 miles over 2 days, because there is no way he could have ended up in the same spot as me, as big as that wilderness is. No possible way. As soon as I shined my light on him, he took off again. I started to chase him but didn't want to get lost in the wilderness in the dark, so I stopped quickly after about 100-200 feet. This one couldn't be written off, because the only way he could have been in both places is if he was following me. I decided that the trip was over first thing in the morning, and ended up hiking back out over 3 days, always doubling back, trying to throw anyone following off my trail, and sometimes hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods, and to actually have to brainstorm on things I could do to best avoid ending up being killed. On the first night of hiking out, twice I heard what sounded like a person walking circles outside my tent. But by the time I got the courage to look out, nobody was there. On the second night, I heard what I thought was an animal making noises at first in the distance, but I slowly decided that it sounded more like a human making animal calls. But it also could have been an actual animal, but I didn't actually see the guy again, but it really sounded like a person making noises. I basically cried when I finally got back to my vehicle. The relief was so strong. To this day, this was the most terrifying experience I ever had. I have no idea who the guy was or what his intentions were, but I just can't really articulate just what a terrifying few days it was. The whole situation was pretty intense, especially given that it went on for a few days. Like, imagine the feeling of noticing that there is someone following you in a dark alley. then stretch this out into 3 days and make it to where you have to sleep in the alley. And that's exactly what this experience was like. The feeling wasn't of being scared, but it was this constant knot in my stomach that someone out there was hunting me for 3 days. It was a Sunday early in the morning. I live in the suburbs, but my parents own a farm that I enjoy going to because I get to see my dog. Her name is Molly. She's a mutt, but she's not a tiny dog by any means. At that time, I felt very safe around her and would often take her for walks in the forest that was nearby. The day started off like any other. Me and my dad got in the car, drove around for a while, and arrived at the farm. I got out of the car and hugged Molly. My parents always got angry when I hugged her. This was simply because I would smell like her for the rest of the day. I put a leash on her and asked my dad if I could take her for a walk. He always thought that we would just go down a road and back, but I always found it more interesting to take her to the forest. I always felt a certain kind of peace and relax there that was unmatched by anything else. So we took a turn and headed to the forest. When we got there, I would take her leash off so she could explore on her own. Most of the time I would carve my name into the trees or look for anything else interesting. I was playing baseball with some rocks and a wooden leg, most likely from an old table, and then I heard it. Molly was barking at something. This wasn't normal when we were in the forest. I thought it was a fox or some other animal, so I quickly grabbed the wooden leg like a weapon. I knew that if it was a fox, I would attack it, but I had a sense of security when I was holding it. I called out to Molly, "Molly, Molly," but she kept barking. This was actually very strange for me, because she always came to me when I called her. I followed the sound of her barks and stumbled across a scene that I'll never forget. There was a man, most likely in his late 50s, half naked, carrying a large machete in one hand and holding moonshine in the other. This was the first time that I stumbled across someone in the woods, especially someone half naked and carrying a big-ass machete. He was completely ignoring Molly and hacking away at the ground for some reason. I didn't really know how to handle the situation. Even now, I still don't know how I would handle it. "Sir, are you okay?" I said, confused. I don't think I understood the seriousness of the situation at the time. He turned around, revealing his face. He had blue eyes I had never seen to this day. I could see them so well because they were wide open. "Come here, boy. Look what I dug up." I was afraid if I didn't listen to him, he would start chasing after me, and that was something I wanted to avoid at all costs. I got closer, but kept a good distance. I didn't see anything except for an empty hole. He returned to hitting the ground with his machete, occasionally taking sips from the bottle. I used this window of time to get my dog, and started walking away slowly, as to not notify him that I was leaving. But then, I took one final glance at the man, and this time, his head was dug deep in the hole. I was intrigued, so I kept looking. I know how stupid of me, but when he finally got up from the ground, I was shocked when I saw him carrying a bone in his mouth. I have no idea what animal it belonged to, if it even did belong to an animal. That's when I saw enough and started running with my dog. As we ran, I heard him laughing, and then I saw something flying from the corner of my eye. It was that damn machete. I heard him yell, "God damn it." This actually made me run even faster. I know the forest very well. so I wasn't afraid of getting lost. I went through branches and bushes until I got out of the forest. But I didn't stop running until I arrived at the garage, where my father was testing out lights on our tractor. I didn't tell him a single thing about the man, since I was afraid that he would get angry and wouldn't allow me to walk Molly anymore. Needless to say, I never, ever went to that forest alone, ever again. When I was younger, around 14 to 15 years old, my family used to camp at a state park. Every night, my friend and I would walk through the woods. We would call this the ritual. On this night, we decided to walk further into the woods than usual. Of course, we had flashlights, which would help us navigate through the woods. Part of this ritual was to turn them off as we walked through the night. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite when we heard soft whispering behind us. Obviously, we hit the flashlights and spun around. We didn't see anything, so we kept walking, and then we hear it again. This time, we stop and look around before we decide to head back to our campsite. Then, we see what's whispering. It's a woman, crawling on the ground, whispering just random words. What she was wearing was all black, and she was covered in dirt. When she sees that we notice her, she stands up and says that she is looking for her campsite. We ended up walking her back to the campground and tried helping her find her group. It turns out she was just super drunk, high, and got lost trying to find a bathroom. Her friends didn't even notice that she was missing, and if we didn't go that far into the woods that night, we would have been lost all night. It's pretty creepy now that I think about it. Imagine a lady crawling around, whispering, saying things to herself. Some things in the woods are just very strange. Either way, this is just something really creepy that happened, and I won't ever forget it. I'm a bird hunter who lives in Oregon. I have a Flushing dog I train to hunt. His name is Reggie, who I take out most weekends of the hunting season to look for quail or whatever else there is. For the last 3 years, the only meat I have ate from mid-September through the end of January has been the birds my dog and I hunt. Also the elk or deer that I usually bag during the season. It's actually something I've become pretty passionate about. 2 weekends ago was the end of quail, so I planned a day trip out to East Oregon. For those who don't know, most of Oregon is essentially a desert. The area between the Cascade Mountains and the Pacific is rainy and forested. However, with the exception of a few small mountain ranges, 2/3 of the state east of the Cascades is just red rocks, brush, and country for hundreds of miles, all the way to the Idaho border. Even though it's quite cold this time of the year, it's still amazingly beautiful, with literally millions of acres of public land. I loaded Reggie and my gear into the truck early Saturday morning, several hours before sunrise, and set off. Just at first light, we got to a big, open river valley. I have spent lots of time exploring, but this certain area was new to me. It was about 30 degrees. Looked like a light dusting of snow the night before, but otherwise pretty dry, and would be a fairly clear day. I love these moments, maybe more than anything in life. Being the only human in a massive wild landscape without a single trail or building for miles, the isolation, the giddiness of the upcoming adventure. The feeling of exploring an area that looked the same 500 years ago. The feeling of going out to get my own food. The contrast between hot coffee in my thermos and the cold winter wind on my exposed hands. All of it, just my favorite place to be. I got the dog ready and put on my boots and pack, loaded the shotgun, and we set off along the top of the valley ridge, 600 to 700 yards above the river, looking over the cold landscape. For those who never seen it, watching a hunting dog work is a truly fascinating spectacle to behold. It's honestly why I enjoy upland bird hunting so much. To me, watching a really good hunting dog actively hunt for wild game birds is honestly not that much different from watching a trained dolphin or sea lion at SeaWorld or something like that. A work dog doing its job can be so focused and intelligent. It's shocking sometimes. I trained Reggie well, but so much of it is just primal. It's Reggie's 6th hunting season, so we spent hundreds of days off trail, exploring the backcountry, and we have really learned to read each other well. Coastal rainforest, high desert, alpine mountains, hardwood forest, farmland, swamps, marshes. We have adventured through it all together. If there's a game bird near, Reggie sells it. I can tell by the way that he moves his tail, the frequency of sniffing, and the lateral angles of his turns. I can tell if he smells another person from how he looks back at me. I can tell if he smells a coyote, wolf, bear, or mountain lion from how he drops his spine. I can tell if he smells an elk, deer, or moose from how he tilts his head to catch the wind. He's my best friend, and we're actually a real, solid team. About an hour after we started hiking along the valley ridge, we came to a gully that cut downhill through the ridge towards the river, which we would have to cross. I picked the way down the steep rise to the other dry, boulder-filled creek bed at the bottom of the gully, where a deer trail led back up to the other side. Halfway down the slope, Reggie started acting real strange. He stopped about 30 feet in front of me, cocked his head to the side, and fixed his gaze down to our left, towards the spot in the dry creek bed as it dropped down the valley. He then leaned his head, as if trying to get a better view, and then started turning around towards me without pulling his eyes off the spot, which he really only does when he's actually scared of something, like when we go to the vet, or I start up a chainsaw. Then he bolted up the steep side of the gully to where I was standing. "What is it, bud?" He kept switching his gaze from my eyes to the same spot below us, while pacing around in half circles. Strange. My first thought was mountain lion, which I always have at the back of my mind. They're all over the place out here, but they clear out long before they let people, let alone a person with a dog, get this close to them. We got across this gully and keep moving, so I patted the dog on the head and kept on moving down towards the bottom of the gully. Reggie stayed right on my heels the entire time. The bottom of the gully was a dry creek bed loaded with car-sized boulders, with a lot of rocks and gravel running between the rock formations and steep, grassy walls of the gully. As I was crunching over the gravel, Reggie stopped in the middle of the creek bed and once again was fixed on something to our left, down the gully. This time he dropped his spine, and I could see his hackles raise. Oh shit, I thought. Maybe there is some kind of animal in the rocks down there. I flipped the safety off my shotgun and started talking to Reggie in the quote-unquote cute buddy tone I use when I'm trying to calm him down. I started walking towards a big boulder in the middle of the creek bed that was blocking my view. Looked like once I was past it, I would have a clearer field of view over the entire gully, all the way down to the valley side of the river. Reggie was still frozen in place. I patted his head as I passed on his right side. Once I got a few paces past him, I noticed he wasn't following me, which he always did, even if it was a bear ahead of us. I looked back at him. "Let's go, bud," Let's go get it. He started pacing around in half circles again, with his ears back and his tail down. What the fuck, I thought. Definitely never seen him do this before. Unless again, we're like at the vet. I seen him chase 400-pound black bears off my property and squabble with countless coyotes. He's not scared of much. This got me pretty anxious. I shouldered my shotgun and decided that before we keep moving, at this point, checking behind the boulder where something had the dog all tweaked out was a safe thing to do. So I moved quickly. In my experience dealing with black bears and mountain lions, 99.9% of the times you bump into one, they're terrified and run away as fast as they possibly can, especially when surprised by something with confident movement that's making lots of noises. But definitely don't do this with a grizzly bear. I heard Reggie start following me as I started to move around the boulder. I came around the big rock on the right side, and in front of me was a big clearing in the creek bed and a huge, big horned sheep, a ram, no more than 25 feet in front of me. We run into big horned sheep out in this country all the time, so it wasn't that much of a surprise. What was surprising was how this thing was sitting. That's the only way I can think to describe it. It was sitting on its folded back legs, like a dog or cat would, holding itself up with a straight back posture, with its front legs locked in the gravel, staring straight ahead, so I couldn't see its face. These are very skittish animals. They would never let a person get this close. A bunch of things went through my mind at the same time. Maybe it's dead. No, it was cold, and I could see steam coming from its slow breathing. Maybe it's wounded and dying. Maybe it's stuck on some old fencing or something. Right then, Reggie started barking. Not just barking, but like snarl barking, like he was in a fight. He's a pretty quiet dog generally, and he never barks at deer, elk, or rams. Maybe prances after them for a few seconds. That's if we bump into one when we're hiking and we spook it. But he's never been very interested in big mammals. It actually startled me. I looked back at him, and he had his front legs splayed out. His head was down, his tail was down. His hackles were raised up so high that he didn't even look like Reggie no more. And he was fully showing his teeth and barking and snarling like I never seen. He looked feral, like a coyote. I could hear the snap of his teeth as he barked again and again. I looked back at the ram, still, just sitting there, unmoving, staring straight ahead. Now that was fucking strange. I never known a wild mammal to do anything but run away, terrified at the presence of a canine, let alone not even move a muscle with a canine being aggressive. I was pretty convinced at that point that the ram had to be real sick or super fucked up in some way. Definitely close to death, even if it was tangled up on something. Or maybe he had got trapped in a leg snare. It would be freaking the hell out with a dog going crazy next to it, the way Reggie was. "Reggie, here!" I yelled to him. Here is sort of my catch-all command for him, meaning, stop what you're doing and get to my heels right fucking now. Reggie didn't even look at me. I took my shotgun in my left hand, turned and took a step towards the dog and pointed at the ground in front of me, and pretty much screamed, "Reggie, here!" Again, nothing. He just kept barking and snarling at the ram. That really put me on edge. He had never just completely ignored a firm command before. It's like I wasn't even there. I turned back to the ram and shouldered my shotgun again. Something was wrong. Real fucking wrong. All my years spent in the backcountry, hunting and tracking big game animals. I mean, I literally have guided ram hunts professionally, just one valley over, and I had never seen anything like this. The wind was picking up down the gully. I felt its bite on my hands. The light dusting of snow from the night before was getting whipped up around the gully. I started moving around the ram to its right, trying to gain some elevation to stay somewhat above it. As I rounded its position to get a look at its face. Bighorn sheep don't attack people. They're skittish as hell, so I wasn't scared of that. But this thing seemed unwell, so I figured all bets were off. As I was sidestepping around it, the wind in the gully started messing with the pressure in my ears. I felt like I was landing while inside an airplane, and my eyes popping slightly dulled the volume of Reggie snarling and barking, and the wind howling down around the rocks. My heart was pounding pretty good at this point. I got to a spot about 8 feet directly to its right, and about 3 to 4 feet above it, up the slope of the gully, and could start to make out its face. My heart rate was going insane, uniquely so, to the point I actually noticed the pressure change made it so I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears, and feeling it in my cheeks and eyes. It felt like I had taken a few Red Bulls, then sprinted a mile. Trying to calm myself down and get a grip only made me more jumpy and anxious. I took another step and could see its mouth. It was slightly open, with milky snot running from its nose and saliva dripping from its bottom lip, with little spurts and flecks shooting out every time it exhaled a steamy breath. What the fuck? I kept saying out loud. I took another step and could start to see its eyes behind the big, full curls of its horns, which were pocked with scars and abrasions from a lifetime of fighting other rams and existing in this hard, rocky country. I took another step so I was able to essentially look at it from the front for the first time and see its full features. It had tears pouring out of its eyes, and it sounded almost like it was moaning. Alright, I thought, this thing is incredibly fucked up. Is it a virus or something? Is its lower spine broken? I wanted to put it out of its misery, but shooting a bighorn sheep without a license is a felony with a $15,000 fine. So I started thinking about hiking back and calling the fish and game officers. I lowered my shotgun and was about to turn to go back towards the dog when it snapped its head up to the right and looked right at me. Until my last day alive, I will never forget that moment. All the wind was knocked out of me, or sucked out of me. It felt like I was free falling with my stomach in my throat. I couldn't move. I pissed myself, just straight up urinated in my pants for the first time since I was a baby. Tears started rolling out of my eyes down my cheeks. My hands and feet went numb. I didn't notice the dog move, but Reggie was suddenly right at my feet, with a strap from my backpack in its mouth, pulling on it as hard as he could, as though we were playing tug of war, yanking me back the way I had come. But I couldn't move. I couldn't raise my shotgun. Couldn't look away from the ram. I was stuck. Then, the ram started weeping. That's the only way I can describe it. Fucking weeping. It didn't move its body, only its head. But it was whimpering and weeping, like a fucking person. Its facial features became very human. Its eyes bulged. Its bottom lip was quivering. It was whimpering out noises like it was trying to speak between sobs, while sucking in air like a crying child would. Then, unmistakably, it started speaking. Or more like it started pleading. Don't go. Don't go. Don't go. It was increasing gradually, from a whimpering pleading to a desperate screaming. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was gonna throw up, or had already thrown up. After what felt like about 15 seconds, my dog finally yanked on my pack hard enough to get me to stumble, and I lost my footing. I couldn't move my leg to replace my foot, so I went down to one knee, then buckled ahead down the slope, rolling onto a shoulder, and finally breaking my eye contact with the ram. The second I broke eye contact with that thing, I could breathe again, and the sensation of falling went away. Reggie was whining and barking now, right in my face, licking my cheek, yanking me away from where I had fallen. I pushed myself on my palms and just screamed, "Go!" to the dog and grabbed my shotgun and half sprinted, half crawled up the hill out of the gully as fast as I could. The screams of the ram were getting louder. It started to hurt my ears. Reggie was ahead of me, stopping every 20 feet or so to look at me and bark towards the noise. I could see the dog was shaking like a leaf. The screaming started to turn into a single, unbroken roar that sounded half beast and half wind. The pressure in my head was so bad that a throbbing reddish blackness flooded my vision, and I could barely see. I just kept crawling and scrambling towards my dog's barking and eventually crossed the crest of the slope at the top of the gully and was on flat ground again atop the valley ridge. Right then, the roaring stopped, the wind died down, and I felt the pressure in my head give way. The darkness faded from my vision, and the light of the day filled the world again. I stood up and jogged a short distance, until a thirst like I had never felt came over me. I collapsed at the base of a rock and called Reggie over. I took like 25 gulps of water out of my camelback. I realized I had thrown up all over myself at some point while scrambling out of the gully, or maybe before, and had a few deep cuts in my palms and knuckles. Reggie was still shaking like he had just come out of an ice bath, and whining as though he was hurt. I checked him for injuries, but he seemed alright, so I gave him some water and put an arm around him trying to calm him down a bit. I wiped as much of the dirt and snow-caked vomit off my coat, while keeping an eye and a shotgun barrel trained on the crest of the gully, expecting with a deep dread to see ram horns slowly coming over the crest. But they didn't. After a minute or so, I got my shit together. I took another sip of water, stood up and booked it the entire 3 miles or so back to the truck, jogging the entire way. As soon as I could see my truck, I fumbled my keys out of my coat pocket, unlocked it, and bolted straight for the driver's side door. I threw the dog into the passenger seat, the gun into the back seat, and piled in behind the wheel without even taking my pack off. I fired the engine up and tore down the dirt road much faster than it was safe. I got to the highway and didn't stop until we were in my driveway. It's been 2 weeks since that day, and I still haven't been able to sleep a full night or talk to anyone about it. The hell would I tell people without them thinking I lost my mind? Reggie has never liked sleeping in my bed before, but he's been curled up as close as he can to me every night since then. I have no way to explain what happened out there. I have no clue what it was controlling or possessing that animal. But I know one thing. It felt like there was a person inside that ram. It felt like a person's spirit was stuck in there and desperately wanted out. However, based on the way my dog was acting, I got the feeling that if I did end up helping it, I wouldn't have ever left that gully. I am sincerely terrified in a way I have never known possible. I've been running in these woods for as long as I can remember, but this encounter makes me change my mind. The story begins at around 6:30 p.m. I had finished eating and decided to go on a run, as I always do. I always use the same path, cross the street, run for about a mile, and pass the gate that goes into the forest. Something important to note is that the trail I used in the forest is separated about halfway through. One path is paved and the other isn't. I always go into the unpaved trail first and then turn into the paved one after about 3 miles. Nothing really ever goes wrong. I meet some people walking their dogs, but other than that I'm pretty much alone. At least, I thought I was. I had been running for a while now when I heard a notification coming from my phone. A notification from AirDrop. Since I didn't want to make it look like I was worried, I kept running for a couple of minutes and then stopped to change the music. I opened the AirDrop dreadfully. Who the hell was sending me stuff? I was pretty sure I was alone. I clicked on the drop and my heart sunk. It was a Snapchat picture of me running with the caption, "You look good." I didn't turn around. Instead, I kept running like nothing happened until I got to a certain point. You see, the forest is surrounded by a fence to stop children from coming in unsupervised. And I didn't like that rule when I was little, so my friends and I cut a hole in it. When I was aligned with that hole, I quickly turned and buried myself into the forest, aiming for my escape. I could hear something behind me, and I still didn't turn back. When I finally got to the hole, I jumped through it, and absolutely booked it to the fire station that was a couple streets down. The last thing I could hear when leaving the forest was an angry huff and metal scraping against metal. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted from me, but I will never run in this forest again. Late at night, I go to the bathroom multiple times, but for the past 4 days, every time I go to leave, I can see myself still standing in the mirror from the corner of my eye. It's like the other me is watching me, leaving the bathroom. It terrifies me to the point where I almost run out without looking directly at the mirror. I never told my husband about it, because I didn't want to acknowledge it out loud. But today, I took a nap in our bed while he sat up in the chair next to it, watching TV. When I woke up, he told me that he had seen me sit up and crawl backwards to the edge of the bed and stand up in front of our bedroom door from the corner of his eye. He thought it was weird, but I got up like that because I'm in the last month of my pregnancy and I can't really move so well without it hurting. So he tried talking to me, but when I didn't answer, he said that he looked at the door to find me not there and still sleeping in bed. I got really creeped out, and I finally told him about what I have been seeing in the bathroom. He thought it was creepy as well, but didn't want to really talk about it anymore, because he thinks it will give whatever it is power or energy. I have no idea what it wants, or why we have both seen it, but if you have any idea, please let me know. Also, as you're getting ready for bed tonight, walking out the bathroom, take a peek behind you towards the mirror and see if your own reflection is looking at you as you walk out. This is one of the scariest experiences that has ever happened to me. Even simply by writing this, it brings back so many nightmares. And it reminds me as to why I will never go camping again. I had been attending Camp Rock Water for about 4 years now. I used to love camping, being able to see some new faces, getting to do fun and exciting activities. My favorite was the river rope swing. I never wanted to leave that swing once I got on. I was just so excited to go back, mainly because it would be my last year I went. And then summer finally came, and it was finally time to go camping. When I got to camp after a 4-hour car ride, I was so excited. I was remembering all my old favorite places. First things first, my mom had to take me to the lodge to get signed up. When we got into the lodge, there were a lot of people there. We waited in line until it was our turn to sign up. Before we were handed any papers, the lady at the table told us that there had recently been some weird things going on a few miles down through the woods from us. I just brushed it off and ignored it. I think I was just too excited to finally be able to go to camp again. My mom helped me lug my suitcase to the cabin. When we got there, I was so happy to see some old friends from last year. Kyle, was one of my longtime camp friends. He was sitting in a corner making his bed. Jacob, another one of my really good friends, was on the floor taking stuff out of his bag. And who could forget about Brad? He was putting stuff in the closet, like baseball bats and golf clubs. As for the other two kids, I had no idea who they were, but they both seemed to like me. It turns out they were brothers. Their names were Brandon and Nathan, and it being their first year here, they were kind of nervous. We all got settled in, and after our parents left, we sat down and started talking about past adventures in camp. It wasn't for another hour that our cabin leader arrived. When he got in, he kind of looked at us all with a gloomy face. He turned to us and said, "Hey guys, I'm your cabin leader for the next 2 weeks. Now, before we do anything, I have to tell you that some things have changed, and we will have to be more cautious due to the weird things that have been happening." We all were a little uneasy, but we wouldn't let that stop us from having the best summer ever. The day continued on as normal. We introduced ourselves, played some cards in our cabin, went outside and played basketball, went to the mess hall to eat, and came back to the cabin to sleep. It was kind of strange that there were only 6 cabins full of people, when there's always around 30. So the next day we woke up. It was raining hard. The sounds of the rain smacking the metal roofs of the cabins echo off to the distance. The camp leader was nowhere to be found. So we kind of sat around the middle of the cabin, just waiting for our cabin leader to get back. We then started talking about some ghost stories that happened around the camp. Some of them seemed completely stupid, but others were kind of scary. And just to let you all know, outside of our cabin, there were about 400 acres of woods. In those woods, there were some obstacle courses, the chapel, and the river. There was one more thing in the woods that nobody really knew about because it was so far off. It was the original Camp Rock water cabins. There were only a few of the older cabin leaders that knew about it and how to get to them. They say that back in the early 1900s, when the camp was first established, 2 kids got into a fight in their cabins, and one kid killed the other in his sleep. He had apparently taken a heavy rock and dropped it on the other boy's head. Legend has it that the presence of the boy who was killed is seen walking around the old campground and chapel. They say that the boy can sometimes be seen crying at the back of the chapel. Someone even said they went to the cabins and saw his head peeking out from one of the windows. At this point, everyone in our cabin was really scared. I swear, Brad was gonna have a panic attack. That's when our camp leader came rushing in through our cabin door. He told us that we needed to pack our things and go to the lodge. We would have to call our parents in the morning to tell them to take us home. We walked all the way from our cabin to the lodge in the rain, completely wet. When we got there, only 4 other cabins had been there. As I was sitting next to the fireplace with my cabin mates, we overheard people talking about what was going on. Someone had said that all of cabin 6 had gone missing after returning from the chapel. The conversations after that got really boring that we ended up falling asleep in the lodge. Later that night, I woke all of my friends. I wanted to go and check out what happened in the woods. Call me stupid all you want, but mind you, I was also younger. Though at first all of my friends didn't want to go, they still agreed to tag along with me. We grabbed a few flashlights and snuck past the cabin leaders that were sleeping near the exit. When we got outside, it was still raining, but now it was also pitch black outside. This still didn't stop us from heading over to the woods. When our group finally got to the mouth of the woods, Brad and Jake just couldn't do it. They walked back to the lodge through the shortcut in the gardens. All that were left were Kyle, Brandon, Nathan, and I. We walked slowly through the path that leads to the chapel. Every now and then, we would trip over some uprooted trees, but we still kept going. We could see the chapel ahead of us, but we knew there was something wrong. It was very quiet. The rain had stopped too, and there was no wind, nor any kind of animal in sight. As we walked up to the chapel, Brandon, who was carrying one of the flashlights, just started screaming. He then ran as fast as he could back towards camp and dropped his flashlight. The light was shining through the chapel, and I kid you not, through one of the windows, we saw the face of a child crying. That's when we all screamed and started to run towards the camp as well. Out of fear, we lost all sense of direction and had no idea where any of us were. As we came up to the ravine that led down to the river, that's where we saw in the pitch darkness a silhouette of a small black figure that was blocking our way. Our only way out was taking the ravine. Nathan, Kyle, and I began going down the side of the ravine, and we noticed another figure. That's when I shot my flashlight down a ways, and there was Brandon, just lying dead, with his head smashed in, blood everywhere. To be honest though, it seemed like he had tripped maybe on an uprooted tree and fell down the side of the ravine, but we had to just keep running, so we left him there. We were halfway down the ravine when we could feel the sweat falling into our eyes like ocean water, and there it was again, the figure of a little boy standing at the end of the ravine, waiting for us to play with him. I told everyone just to keep running, and that's when I looked behind us, and Nathan had disappeared. He was no longer with us. I'm not sure if he took another way or ended up running a different path or back, but he was completely gone. Kyle and I kept running, and that's when I saw the old stairs coming up to our left that led back up to the back part of camp. When we got to the stairs and we were almost to the top, that's when we could hear a kid saying, "We can play with the rocks." We didn't even stop to look back. We ran all the way to the lodge. When we got there, all of the cabin leaders had been away. 2 other cabins had left to go investigate what was going on in those woods. They both went missing. And then Kyle finally spoke up. Even though he hadn't said anything all night, he did say, "I saw him. The boy just wanted to play with us." And that was it. The next morning, our parents picked all of us up, and we never went back again. Years have passed since that encounter. Kyle was booked into a mental hospital. They said for some serious mental issues that he had going on. Jake and Brad were never found, and nobody ever mentioned anything about them after that day. As for the other 3 cabins of kids, nobody ever found out what happened or where they went. Maybe nobody cares. But I will tell you this though, after this experience, I have never, nor will I ever, go camping again. As legend goes, to become a skinwalker, you must attain priesthood, and then kill a member of your own family. Then, and only then, can you gain the powers to shapeshift. Then, and only then, are you a true skinwalker. According to local folklore, a man had just done that. An Indian priest not only killed one, but 5 immediate members of his family. They never caught this man. He disappeared into the woods, never to be seen again. When Jason and Alex set out for their camping trip, they knew all the old legends, and they laughed at the idea that a skinwalker would come get them if they ventured out onto the old native land. the same land that the supposed murders took place. And why should they believe the legends? A legend of a man becoming a beast? Jason and Alex were brothers. They spent their entire lives together until Jason had gotten married. Then, Jason moved away and started a family. But not Alex. Alex stayed in their hometown, tending to their parents, making an honest living off the land, and try to be a good person. And Alex had succeeded at this. He hadn't broken a commandment in years, and was well on his way, well, in his own mind, to heaven. 3 years had passed between their last get-together, and 3 more might have passed if Alex didn't insist on a camping trip. But insist he did, and there they were. It was getting dark, and the two of them were laying out under the stars. They were deep in the woods, and they had no GPS or maps, but they knew the path back from where they were. They had gone there as kids. Never know, huh? Alex replied. He only caught bits and pieces sometimes. We can never let Dad know, Jason said. Know what? That we stayed on the old native land past dark. We promised him as kids, and I wouldn't want to upset him now. He's getting pretty close to dead, and if we started an argument now, we may not resolve it in time. For, just don't tell him or Ma, okay? Okay, sure. They both were silent for a while, until up creeped a small raccoon. Well, look at that, Alex called, as he pointed towards the critter. It stared at them for several minutes, not moving, not attempting to flee when they motioned towards it. It stayed, almost perfectly, still. And then, finally, it left. Minutes later came a deer, and again the creature stayed and watched them. Unwavering determination glared in its eyes. For almost 2 hours the brothers were kept awake, as every animal they knew to live in the forest, and some they were almost sure that didn't inhabit the area, came to gaze upon them. The final animal was a gray wolf. It slowly moved towards them, and when it was 5 feet away, it stopped. Don't move. Don't panic. It'll go, Jason assured Alex. The wolf slowly stood up on its hind legs, and then its limbs began to contort and pop. Horror slid over Jason and Alex's faces as they saw the fur tear open, revealing light brown flesh underneath. Finally, they gazed upon what looked like a man with a wolf head. The skull of the wolf split open like a melon, the fur sliding off of it, the bone chipping and falling like a fragile eggshell. And then in its pace, slowly grew out the head of a man. The man now stood before the paralyzed brothers. They couldn't seem to move.
This is my land,
said the man with an almost supernatural smile. Get the fuck away from us, Jason said as fiercely as he could. The man began to laugh, and as he continued to laugh the pitch changed. It grew deeper, from that of a man to that of a demon, and soon it sounded as if the devil himself was out to get them. The man's skin grew black as coal, and his eyes yellow like a cat's. His demonic laughter echoed through the forest as he drew closer and closer. The brothers being unarmed, they had no choice other than to flee, and that's what they did. They ran as fast as they could, except instead of out to their cars, they were cornered into running deeper into the woods. For hours they seemed to play cat and mouse. Several times animals they passed would burst open, revealing the deranged man, but they continued to run. Finally, reaching a cabin, they ducked inside. They were filled with fear, and the brothers felt that leaving the cabin would result in them dying. What they found in the cabin made them regret their ignorance on legends. For in the main bedroom of the cabin were corpses, at least 100 of them. Every animal they had seen that night was there. And then they saw larger bodies, human bodies. It was then that the man burst into the room, except he was once more a wolf. In his deep voice, he said,
"Welcome home."
The following week, the police found the cabin during their search for Jason and Alex. They found the brothers, but their faces looked as if they were eaten by an animal of some sort. 6 days later, a security camera several states over caught Alex filling up a car with gas. Several witnesses also reported seeing the dead man, and on nearly all accounts, he was seen smiling, a wide, unnatural grin. Every night, I lie awake on my bed. I lay there in the darkness, looking at the ceiling. I'm afraid to go to sleep, but I know that I will, eventually. My eyes are heavy, my muscles are weak, my head is numb. I know it's there. I can feel it, staring at me, waiting for me to go to sleep. I can hear its footsteps, walking around next to me. When I leave my house, it knocks over my pictures. It throws my books on the floor. It's laughing at me. It loves my fear. It loves making me scared. I want to throw the pillow over my head and hide from it like a child would. But when I do, it gets angry. It throws more of my stuff around. It wants a reaction, but I refuse to give it one. I stare at the ceiling, trying to ignore it. Eventually, I fall asleep, and this is when it takes over. In my dreams, it shows me its world. In its world, I have ate the dead bodies of children. I have tortured innocent men and women. In my dreams, I have enjoyed every sickening act of depravity. It shows me in its face. I stare into its glowing eyes. I see its rotten teeth buried with a charred face. I feel the heat of its breath in my eyes as it snarls at me. Then I wake up in a cold sweat. This happens every night. During the day, it's still there. It never goes away. It follows me wherever I go. It tries to control me, and I never know it's there. It only listens to its own rules, and it knows how to control me. It makes me hate. It makes me violent. It makes me angry. The other day, I punched the man walking his dog. As I approached him, he looked at me. He looked me straight in the eyes. I didn't like the way he looked at me. He looked at me like he was disgusted by me, like he was better than me, like I was absolute scum to him. So I just hit him in the face. I heard the snapping of his nose. He fell to the floor. His dog started whining and licking his bloody face. People ran over and helped him up while I just walked away, still furious about the way he looked at me. Days later, I learned that the man was actually blind. I live with it, but I hate it. I want it gone, but I know it has complete control over me. I don't even leave the house anymore because I don't want to hurt anyone else. However, when I stay inside, it becomes angry. It makes me hurt myself. The wounds on my arms and wrists reflect its hold on me. Each cut represents a day. Each burn represents a year. I have begged for help. I even went to go see a doctor, and he told me that I have nothing to worry about. that I'll be completely fine with their help, and he arranged for some counseling to help me. But the counseling didn't work. It never left me. It still makes it home within my head, and it still torments me day and night. The doctor then scheduled some sessions of electroshock therapy. I lost all of my childhood memories as the electricity flowed through my head, down my body, through my legs. My muscles got really tense. I screamed and clamped my teeth on the rubber block that was shoved in my mouth. Every second felt like an hour in indescribable pain. But after everything I went through, it still didn't leave. Even during the EST sessions, I felt like I could see it, standing beside me, laughing at me as I writhed in agony. It was laughing in my torture. Now I'm just here sitting and waiting. I'm waiting for the priest to visit me. My neighbor sent him over without my permission, but I'll just send him away.
God cannot help me.
I haven't been to church
Since I was a child,
I gave up on God. He never showed himself to me. He's never helped me before, and I have never felt his love. How can I love him when he's allowing this horrible thing to latch itself upon me? Have I not been a good person? Have I not followed the rules of his society? Haven't I loved and cared for anyone who's been asking for my love? If all that is true, then why do I suffer under the hands of this thing? There's a knock at my door. I open it. On the porch stands the old priest, carrying a bag. He then tells me if he can come in. Feeling polite, I let him into the house. I become uncontrollably angry. I begin to hate this man with all my being. This man does not belong here. He doesn't belong in my house.
he has to leave.
I then demand him to leave. The priest walks up to me and stands face to face with mine. I stare into his eyes, those Christian eyes that judge me, those Christian eyes that advocate death and torment, those Christian eyes that support everything I hate. I scream in his face. I yell at him to get the fuck out of my house. Instead of leaving, the priest holds up a coin and he tells me to hold it. He takes my hand and he places the coin into my hand. Then he closes my hand. I feel the coin begin to heat up. I feel it scorching my skin. I feel it burning. I feel it making my hand weak with pain. I drop the coin and stare at my hand. I can still feel the scorching heat, but there is no mark, no blistering, no sign of anything. What was that? I asked the priest. It's a blessed coin, the priest calmly replies. The priest then puts his hand on my shoulder, and I feel my shoulder become numb. The priest stares me straight in the eyes, then calmly tells me, "You're in danger. I know what's happening to you, and I can help you, if you will let me help you." He moves his face closer to mine. "Will you let me help you?" Staring into his eyes, I don't feel angry anymore. I begin to feel sad, very sad. I begin to cry as I stare into the eyes of the priest. Please, just help me. I will, my son, but you must trust me. No matter what happens, you must understand. I am helping you. Do you understand? I nod my head. The priest says I have to be comfortable, so I lead him to my bedroom. He tells me to lie down on the bed, and as I do, he opens his bag. He pulls out a purple sash, decorated with white crosses, and lays it over his shoulders, so it drapes across his chest. He is then asking me if I own any belts. I tell him I keep them in my top drawer. He opens the drawer and pulls out 2 belts. He walks over to me and takes my hand. "Do you trust me, my son?" "Yes," I shakily reply. The priest then takes my hand and, using the belt, ties my arm to the headboard of the bed so it cannot move. He then ties up my other hand to the headboard with the other belt. My arms are outstretched like Jesus as he lays upon the cross. Why are you doing this? I ask him. It's for your safety, he replies. He takes a Bible and rosary out of his bag. He closes his eyes and calmly chants the Lord's Prayer. Then he places the rosary upon my chest. I squirm as I feel the rosary burning my skin, piercing my chest as I lay on the bed. My arms are restrained, so I cannot move. I cannot take this scorching rosary off my chest. It hurts. My God, how it hurts. The priest begins to say another prayer, a prayer I actually never heard before. As he speaks, I hear a loud ringing in my ears. The priest gently takes my hand and continues to pray. I try to squeeze his hand to cause him pain, like the pain he is causing onto me, but in his gentle touch, my hand goes numb. He tenderly kisses my hand, then he continues to pray. He takes a glass bottle of water out of his bag and pours the water into his hands. He rubs his hands together, then he gently grabs my head, his thumbs resting against my temples. His touch burns me. Inside my head I feel such intense pain. The pain makes me remember the hospital, remember when doctors torture me with electricity. I scream, but my own voice doesn't leave my mouth. Instead, I emit a low gurgling sound from my throat. The water from the hands of the priest drips down into my eyes, and I squeeze my eyes closed. The water makes my eyes feel like they're being ripped out of my skull. My horrid gurgling cries makes my throat hoarse. My throat hurts, but I cannot stop screaming. I have no control over myself anymore. The priest finishes his prayer and suddenly, my body goes completely numb. I stop screaming, and the only sound I hear is my hitched breath in the unbearable silence. Who am I talking to? The priest says.
Not who you see.
I appear to reply. My voice, however, is low and raspy. It isn't my own. Who are you?
Not him. Something else.
I open my eyes and stare directly into the eyes of the priest.
You know, Father. You know all too well.
The priest stares knowingly at me. Why are you here? He asks.
Because he's mine. Because he gave himself to me. Willingly.
His body is not yours. His body belongs to God. I couldn't help but giggle at what he was saying like a little schoolgirl. And then I tell the priest.
His body is mine.
No, it's not. This body is mine.
God has forgotten this man.
God does not forget his children. Say what you will. I will never leave him. The priest tightly grabs my arm. Leave him, he shouts in my face. Leave him, in the name of God Almighty. I command you to leave this man. You have no power, false prophet. I command you to leave this man. I command you to burn in hell. By the power of God, I command you to leave this man.
God does not have enough power to control Goliath, the great beast of burden.
The eyes of the priest widen, and he lowers his head to mine. Goliath, foul creature of hell, servant of the devil, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, you will leave this man and you will never return. My whole body begins to shake as I suffer my first ever seizure. I then stare at the wall. I can't feel my body. I can't control what is happening to me. Leave this man, Goliath. Leave this man and never return. The priest then places his hands across my eyes, blinding my sight. Goliath, in the name of God Almighty, I command you to leave. As I hear the priest speak, I lose consciousness. I awake on my bed, my binds are free, my head severely hurts, and I feel completely exhausted. The priest is sat on the corner of my bed. How are you feeling, my son? The priest is asking me. I feel exhausted, I reply. Is it gone? It has for now, but I cannot promise that it will never return. The priest places his hands on my shoulder. But if it does, then please don't. suffer alone, come to me. I will always be available to help you. The priest smiles at me before turning away and picking up his bag. Rest, my son. I'll see myself out. Father, I say before he leaves through the front door. Yes, my son. How is it that this happened to me? Was I not a good person? The priest then turns to me. That is complete nonsense, my son. Good people will suffer more at the hands of demons than sinners. Demons want to corrupt and destroy. If there is nothing to corrupt, then there is no need to be possessed. Then why doesn't a priest ever get possessed? We do, every day. We have 20 demons sitting on each shoulder, feeding us lies and trying to control us. That's how most people live their lives. They have demons walking with them. Some of them even have demons inside of them, telling them what to do, telling them lies about other people, lies about themselves, trying to get them to kill themselves, and ultimately trying to get them to go to hell with their father, the devil. So, if there are so many, how come you all don't ever become like this? Because we believe that God's undying love keeps us safe, that He will never leave us, and He will always answer our calls for help, because we are His children. The priest turns and leaves my house as I slowly lay my head down, completely lost in thought. A few days passed, and that Sunday, I went to church for the first time in 23 years.
God has forgotten this man.
Before I start the story, it's important for me to clarify that the paranormal here in America isn't seen the same as it is in Mexico, from where my father is from, and from who I heard this story. Here in America, at least from my personal experience, this is seen as nothing more than a cool and sometimes taboo subject to be into, and sometimes people consider it to be sort of a hobby. But in Mexico, on the other hand, it's seen from a much different point of view. This is part of our culture. The same stories that our great-grandparents heard are the same ones that are passed down to us. The stories of duendes, la llorona, nahuales, brujas, and even the devil himself. We're told at such a young age to treat these things with respect and to never take them lightly. To us, it's much more than just witnessing an old chair move on a blurry security camera, or maybe hearing footsteps in an empty room. It's part of our culture. So here's my story. My father is not the type of man to seek attention. He's a humble, honest, hard-working man, and as a result, I believe what he tells me. Since he could remember, he had the misfortune of being more sensitive to the paranormal than most people. What I mean by this is that all throughout his life, he has found himself face to face with most of the stories that we've been warned about. Even now, as a grown man, our entire family has grown accustomed to experiencing more than our fair share. It's almost as if this sort of stuff follows not only him around, but all of us, too. So this story takes place in Mexico, when he was maybe around 8 or 9. He was with his grandfather, who at the time worked as a watchman at one of his friend's stores. This specific store also functioned as a warehouse, similar to stores like Costco or Sam's Club, but on a much smaller scale. For those who are wondering, una bodega. It was around 11 o'clock when they arrived, well past sunset and into the night. My great-grandfather and his friend had struck a deal, and whenever he was on his shift, he could help himself to anything he wanted to eat, as long as he kept the list in order to make sure it wasn't marked down as stolen inventory. as they were getting ready for the night. My dad was told that he could choose anything he wanted to eat. My dad was excited to hear this, as it wasn't often that he was given the opportunity to choose anything from the store that wasn't a necessity without having to worry about having enough to pay for it. He wanted to make sure he made the most of this opportunity and decided to go around the store looking for what he wanted the most. He finally made up his mind and settled on a bottle of chocolate milk. Now, for those who are wondering, a bottle of chocolate milk is something valuable, especially depending on what part of Mexico you're in, compared to chocolate milk or milk overall over here in USA. So he started to make his way around the store and eventually found himself wandering the halls in search of the fridge aisle. After figuring out it was in the very back of the store, he rushed towards the low buzzing hum of the dozens of refrigerators. All he remembers was, and I'll say this in his words, an indescribable feeling of not only pure terror and true fear, but also an endless sense of despair. As he turned the corner, he was face to face with a very tall, thin man. My father tells me this man had to have been at least 2 meters tall. His initial reaction was to try and run away from him, but he couldn't. It was more than being just paralyzed with fear. He felt an endless empty pit inside him as well as around him. He doesn't remember the face of that man, and he doesn't know how much time passed. He had lost his sense of where he was, and at the time, could not for the life of him tell anything except for the fact that it was him and the man in front of him. He does remember, however, that this man was very well groomed and seemed very well kept. Despite not remembering his face, he does recall that he was staring straight at him. He doesn't remember what happened after. He only remembers coming to his senses on the floor in his grandfather's arms, being questioned about what happened. His face was full of tears. All he could manage to choke out was that the man was there, over and over. His grandfather's first thought was that someone had broken in, and he rushed my father back to the front of the store, where the only lockable room was located, the owner's office. He told my father to wait inside the office, and that no matter what, to not open the door for anyone. He would be back as soon as he checked the store to make sure it was safe. But the memory of the man was still all too fresh in my father's mind, and he decided that he would man up and be brave by running into the man again with his grandfather by his side, rather than remain alone inside the store again. Despite his grandfather believing it wasn't safe, he could see the terror in my father's eyes and complied with my father's wish. After checking through each aisle and deciding that the store was safe, they both headed back to the office where my dad explained everything. For the most part, it seemed to be an isolated incident, as my great-grandfather later that morning told the owner what happened, and he claimed it was the first he had heard of anything of that type of stuff happening inside a store. It is worth noting, though, that the store was torn down not 2 months later after this incident, and the owner seemed to give no more of an explanation other than that he was losing money. Despite my dad not daring to outright say what he thinks he saw that night, it's more than apparent to me that based on his description of both the man and the feelings that overcame him, I think it's safe to assume that the man he saw was none other than the devil himself. Before I begin the story, I would like to describe what certain parts of Mexico are like. I'm not talking about Cancun, vacation beach destinations that people be taking to Mexico. I'm talking about deep in the heart of Mexico, in the ranchos and the farms, where there's still no electricity, where there's no bathroom, no fresh water, where you have to walk outside at night in a pitch black field to go to the backwoods to use the restroom. I'm talking about everybody around you is a farmer, and those type of places of Mexico, which is pretty common actually. You might just not hear about it too much. So with this being said, I would like to tell a story of my mom when she used to do her nursing practice when she was in school with a native community in a remote place in Mexico. She said that the internship, where she stayed with the sick people, was across a bridge over a river, and on the other side lived the doctors. So there were times in the middle of the night when she had to carry a sick child to the doctors' houses where they lived. She said crossing that bridge at night was super scary because you could hear La Llorona crying out while you were crossing the bridge. Many of you who love paranormal stuff may have already heard of the word Nahual here in Mexico, and I would guess that also in some other countries in Latino America we call that way people who can shapeshift into animals. Well, here's my story. It was a cold night, I remember, because it was really weird for it to get cold on that side of the country. This was in my parents' house, in a small pueblo, or small town, and back in the day, it was one of the last houses outside of town. Not so many neighbors, but a lot of trees and nature around. The house has a long backyard where we used to have sheep. At one side, a small water stream and trees to the other side. The sheep then started to bleat very loud, something we could call screams. My father then went to give a check on a window in the back side of the house. I still recall his face when he came back quickly, and in a low, urgent voice, he told my mom, "Ve agarra a tu padre y a tus hermanos y diles que vengan ya ahorita. Go ask your father and brothers to come here immediately." They were 4 brothers, my grandfather and my father. When everyone was there, a few minutes later, my father started to tell us what he saw. In the barn, we had 10 sheep. At the moment my father gave a look, all of them were together in just one corner. At the center, there was some kind of big animal. My father described it as a bear, which makes totally no sense, but he said it was big, hairy, and it seemed to be eating one sheep there. This one sheep was screaming really bad. Then, my grandfather told my mom to keep us inside of the house and to keep me in there also with her. If you go outside now, you may catch a bad air. So he made some kind of prayer holding his machete. So his prayer, I remember he said the names of my uncles and also my father's. He then went outside. That's when my grandfather started to yell at the darkness, telling things like, "Vete de aquí, no tienes nada que ver aquí. Deja esta casa. Go away, you have nothing to do here. Leave this house." My father told me that he saw how this thing was in a pose, eating the sheep, which was laying on the ground, still screaming by the way. And when my grandfather yelled at it, this thing seemed to stop and raise its head up towards my family. This thing was only staring at them. Not a single noise, and also no red or shining eyes. Only the shadow looked like it was looking at them. So my father decided to do something at last. He took a big rock, he picked it up from the ground and threw it at this thing. Maybe not the best thing to do in this situation, but I guess this thing was not that strong. Or maybe because it was 6 of us and we all had machetes. But when the rock hit it, this being turned its back and ran away to the forest, running on all 4 legs like an animal would. They then approached the sheep, and my grandpa said how the sheep was on the ground, but it was still alive, but it was completely unskinned. It was horrifying, at least. My grandfather then sacrificed it to stop the suffering. After that night, a family friend told us a story about someone new in town that apparently was a Nahuatl. He told us he spoke to that man, and he told him to leave the town. Indeed, we never happened to live something similar after that. The story of La Planchada. The ghost is a female nurse. Some stories say she was in love with a doctor who ended up leading her to take her own life. And in others, she is simply a vengeful spirit who doesn't approve younger nurses. And in other stories, she is simply a vengeful spirit who kills patients attempting to ease their pain. Yet one story that everyone is familiar with is the one of her at Hospital Juarez in the early 1930s, where she fell in love with a doctor who was secretly engaged to another woman. She was unaware of the doctor's engagement and began having an affair with a man. A few months later, he told her he was going out of town on a business conference, but he was actually going on his honeymoon with his new wife. While he was gone, a coworker found the woman waiting for her lost love, and the coworker revealed the doctor's secret. The nurse fell into a deep depression, which led her to contracting some sort of disease. This thing eventually killed her, and she is now said to return to the room where she died. Whatever the origin is, the ghost is associated with hospitals, where it can be seen walking the halls at night and checking on patients. This spirit is often described as floating or walking, but always silent, and in some accounts, it even glows. Sometimes it's said that she appears as a normal nurse, a full human manifestation, and other times, it is said that she looks evil with the face of a horrendous creature. And a small detail that always sticks out is the uniform that she wears is usually out of date. Despite the possible horrific appearance of this ghost, it oftentimes heals patients it visits in the night, curing them of disease or healing them, and then moving them to other rooms to recover. The patients who see her describe a nurse who appeared in the room and somehow made them feel better. Hospital Juarez, being one of the possible origins of the spirit, is known for appearances of La Planchada. It is said that the ghost returns to the room where she died and heals whoever is inside. So be careful next time you or someone you know is in the hospital and you all have a pretty nurse that comes inside a room to help you. She also told me that the hospital, where she was a full nurse, was haunted by La Planchada. She said some of their sick people would report how a really nice, well-dressed nurse came in and helped them in the middle of the night. She said they would describe her as wearing an old-time uniform that hadn't been used in decades by nurses. But the thing that stood out was that they would always comment on how well kept ironed the nurse's uniform was. Now here's the scary part. Sometimes when they were at the nurse's station in the ICU, they would know when someone was going to code because they could feel as if someone had walked by the nurse's station and into the room of a sick person, but no one was there. They would then get an alert that someone was coding. The nurses used to say that it was la muerte, or death, that would come and try to get the patience. Another story she told me was that when she wasn't practicing nursing yet, she was studying nursing under the monjas, under the nuns, and she said one of the dormitories was haunted. The two dormitories were divided by a hallway, and one day, all the girls were staying in the one that wasn't haunted because they were scared. They decided to roll a coin to the other dorm, and they said that the coin rolled through the hallway and into the other dark, empty room. A few seconds after, they heard the coin stop rolling and drop. The coin was rolled back to them. My dad told me a long time ago about a time when he was a teenager in Mexico, and it was late, and he was walking home after hanging out with his friends. My dad grew up in a rancho, and it was real dark, and the town that he's from is old. Anyways, there was no one out on the road, and he was walking, and he heard a sound, so he looked around at this abandoned house. The house was falling apart, and the windows were nothing but dark openings. He said he saw the back of a man sitting on the top of a roof with his back towards him. As my dad walked past the house, he looked back to see the man still on the roof, and my dad said that the man's legs were so long they touched the ground. I actually think my dad saw Slender Man long before anyone knew what that was. My family doesn't have a rancho or a ranch. However, we live near a mountain where there are 3 crucifixes, and each year in Semana Santa they replace them, which takes about 6 days. While they are gone, it is said that everybody in the community and around there says that the witches go out to hunt children. One year they heard chains being dragged on the roof at nighttime. My father told me about a time in the 70s when he was driving to his hometown in San Luis Potosí with my mom asleep in the back and her dad in the passenger seat. He said it was late at night and it was raining. The road they were on was empty and long and had lots of turns and curves, and the visibility was bad. He said they both spotted a man standing on the side of the road in the pouring rain trying to catch a ride. My dad didn't stop and kept driving, and my abuelito, grandfather, commented saying poor guy standing out in the rain. They didn't think much of it. However, my dad said that a few minutes later, after passing another curve, they saw the same man, again, standing on the side of the road. It was the same guy. They both freaked out and my grandfather said, "Es el diablo, it's the devil," and to keep driving. When I went to Mexico with my dad in the mid-80s, they lived in a rancho, and my dad told me to go to bed once because after midnight, some of the animals that have been cursed by witches start to talk, and they will come around looking for anyone who will talk with them. So if you live in a rancho, in a farm, or own livestock or animals of any kind, be careful if you hear them talking to you tonight.